Welcome to another episode of the Exponential Europe podcast. I am Jason Lim. I work and live in Frankfurt, Germany. I am part of the national team there to see, as we all want to see across Europe, we want to be a community with a cause, and that is to see reproduction and multiplication become the norm again in the behavior and the language of the church in Europe. But today, we're not just going to talk about Europe. We're going to understand the global family of Exponential that we are part of. And I'm so grateful to be sitting here with my new friend, Obe.
Yep. Hey.
Obe, thanks for joining us.
Hey everyone. Obe Arellano.
So is that short?
It is.
For
Obed.
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 Yes.
That's a very Christian name.
It's a very biblical name.
Wow.
I mean, that's
honestly, if I would have seen that.
Quiz number 1 for the podcast. Who was Obed in the Bible?
Yeah, because if I would have seen that, I would have guessed Eritrean.
Okay.
Honestly, like in my neighborhood, very diverse neighborhood of Frankfurt, like when someone's name is like Obadja or Obed or like some weird Old Testament name that you never hear. Yeah. Like 99% they're Eritrean.
Yeah. It's a very Arab. It's a very common name in the Arab for the Arab people. Oh. I've connected just through whatever ministry work with people from that Middle Eastern area of the world, and not Middle East, Arab nations. Yeah, and they're like, oh, my uncle's name is Obed, or I have a brother, or I have something. I mean, it's biblically right.
Was that intentional? Your parents were like, we're going to make this.
So my mom, we were raised Catholic or born Catholic, really, and my mom started reading the Bible when she was pregnant with me. I'm the 5th of 6 kids. Ooh. Yeah, so second youngest. So she and her couple friends started a small group. They didn't know it was a small group back then, just to read the Bible. That's so cool. That's what helped them find their way back to God and became Christian.
That's amazing.
Just by a couple friends reading the Bible.
Story to your name. Yeah. And then they just came across Obed?
Yeah, so as she was reading the Bible, she thought, like, you know what? My next kids, I'm going to find a name from the Bible and name them. So my younger sister also from a biblical name.
Yeah. And so all the other siblings were like, oh, man.
Just some, random, Maria, Martin, Jamie.
Maria's also a good biblical name. Yeah.
Uriel. Those are my brothers and sisters. Edith.
So you are originally from Mexico.
Oh, born in Mexico. Yeah, northern Mexico, Durango. Northern state. Yeah, northern state of Mexico.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And that's where you were born, and then you came?
I was born, I was there. My family moved to Chicago when I was 11.
How was that?
I was a kid. So as a kid, you're just going to go with the flow. I mean, the family moves. And
was there a lot of other kind of Mexican kids when you moved to Chicago in school and stuff, so you felt like you could connect, or were you like out of place? Or?
No, so we actually did a short stint for a few months in California, Northern California. Yeah. It was just like we came in through California. Yeah. We had family there. Yeah. So we kind of connected with my cousins and uncle and all that. The school there, I was out of place. Like, the school had no bilingual ESL kind of thing, so I had to learn English at the same time as learning the
subject,
class, the subject. So that was hard. Then
how long were you there for?
Less than a year.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we moved to Chicago. Chicago, different story.
You're like
the school in Chicago at that. I mean, even I think right now, they have they had Spanish classes, not like to learn Spanish, but the subjects were taught in Spanish.
Oh, wow.
So for me, it was like I went from all English to all Spanish. And I actually thought that now thinking back, it didn't help me.
Right. It would have been better to have some English.
Yeah. I mean, because I have friends that came from Mexico or Latin America around the same time, even after me, like after older than I was, 11 years. And the fact that I delayed learning, by immersion, forcefully. I just had a hard time. It wasn't until my freshman year in high school that I went into all English
That
classes.
is late. Oh wow.
It was late.
Yeah.
So then I was late in. I wasn't forced to learn the language because the community was also very Latino.
So you were kind of in a Latino community most of the high school.
Very, yeah.
I mean, that's also Chicago.
That's Chicago, yeah. Very, large Latino immigrant community from Mexico as well. So
was there any? This is gonna be weird, but was there any connection to like Dave Ferguson already?
No, not at all. Not at all.
It's so. I just realized that you were already in Chicago.
Yeah,
that's weird.
That's right. That connection came years later after I started planting churches.
Yeah. So tell me. So how did from Chicago? What happened after that?
So I'll fast forward through my high school years. I wanted to study architecture. That was my passion.
Ooh.
I took prep classes in high school, ready to go. I had, applied to a university in Chicago. I had become Christian, so I became Christian when I was 17. So I got so passionate. I was serious about my faith. I learned, studied, read on my own just to grow, and I started saying some prayers that any youth pastor would love to have their kids, their students, not their kids, but their students say. And I started just praying like on my own. Okay, God, I'm going into this new season of life. I was a kid. I was very mature for me to saying prayers like that, right?
Crazy, yeah.
And I'm going to spend 5 years because I had already been accepted to a 5-year program for in the architectural program for this university. And I'm like,
in Chicago?
In Chicago, in the Chicagoland area. Yeah,
that's a pretty cool place.
For architecture. Oh yeah. Of course.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'm like, it's gonna be 5 years, but my passion for God was growing, and I'm like, God, is that what you want me to do?
Wow.
Because I'm gonna spend a lot of money and 5 years to become an architect, and I would hate to finish that, get into career, and then later in life be like, I want to in ministry. Right?
Just tell me now.
Just tell me now. That's exactly right.
If you're going to do that anyway, just tell me that. Yeah.
So I started praying. I started seeking some wise counsel. My mentor, I started sharing with my mentor. And God started confirming it. There was a few things that I was asking specifically for God to confirm in certain ways. And he was confirming it. So I ended up changing my focus in college to pastoral theology, to pastoral ministry.
And where did you study?
In Chicagoland, in the Chicagoland area. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I was going to go into Judson University to study my master's in architecture, but then changed it to pastoral theology. And then I ended up finishing in California Christian University.
Cool.
And it was in that time, early on, part of God's confirmation was he wanted me in ministry, and specifically church planting. I had been a Christian for 1 year. I'm like, I have no idea what that means.
Was there any connection to church planting in your life back then?
Not at all. Not at all. Nothing.
That's crazy.
So even the idea of church planting was like a new concept for me. I hadn't seen it anywhere.
Yeah. For someone to start a new church.
Yeah. What? Yeah. So and God's call was, I'm calling you to be a pastor, but not just lead a church. I'm calling you to be a church planter. And I took that, I'm like, that's awesome. I'm glad that I know that. I have no idea what that journey is going to look like. And then, so at this time, all my circles of life, church, friends were all Latino, right? It was a Latino, Spanish-speaking church, Pentecostal church that I was going to. There was no church planting, church reproduction aspect to that.
Interesting.
So I started looking for, books or resources that I can learn more about church planting. But I was asking my pastor, I was asking others in that Spanish-speaking world, and they just would not refer me to anything or anyone.
Interesting.
And that's why I'm like, you know what? I'll just go and learn.
What year is this?
This is 2000. That's when that journey began.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
And then you went off and you planted a church.
Yeah, so I graduated 4 years, so bachelor's in pastoral theology, which, again, I go look back at that, I'm like, what does this even mean?
What does
what I mean? My thing was, I just need to learn more of the Bible so I can at least have a strong foundation. Yeah. The rest will come and God will guide me, that. And at that time also, I thought that I didn't think I was going to be planting churches right away because the culture in that I was in. I was too young to pastor.
Yeah.
Even less
Who's going to
plant the church.
Yeah,
exactly. The church had just gone through a transition.
So how old were you?
Well, at that time I was 22.
22, man.
Yeah.
So you planted a church when you were 20?
I graduated. I didn't think I was going to plant. I told God, okay, God, I mean, I'm not an expert on the Bible, but at least I know some stuff.
Yeah.
And let me know when. If I have to wait 20 years because that's the culture of my church, I'll serve wherever. That was my heart, really. But no, guys, like, now it's now the time.
Yeah.
And I planted the first church with a friend. Me and a friend.
Where was that?
The church in a suburb of Chicago.
And that was Spanish-speaking church?
Spanish. All this was all Spanish-speaking.
And you were
context.
22?
I was 22.
And your friend was?
30.
Now that helped.
Yeah, it did help. Yeah, he had a little bit more experience in ministry. And yeah.
And then you went on to plant more churches after that?
Yeah, so we planted that one. I was there for 2 years. I met my now wife. And when we were engaged, I told my wife, hey, just so you know, God called me to plant churches. So if we get married,
this is what you're getting into.
This is where you're getting into.
Honestly, it's so funny because my father-in-law, when I was getting to know I met my wife in 6th grade.
Yeah.
That's a different story. But no, we reconnected later. And when things were starting to happen, my father-in-law told her, like, look, you need to, like, this person is going into full-time ministry. Don't just think about the guy, like, think about the kind of life you're coming into.
Yeah.
And she had to really, like, we had a big conversation about it.
Of course.
Yeah. Because it's, it impacts the whole family. Yeah.
It does. She had been a Christian for a year, my wife.
Wow.
New to faith.
So she didn't even know what church planting is.
No.
So that's good.
True.
Easy sell.
Yes. But she was just as me 5 years before. She was on fire.
Wow.
She had the example of a Christian was her mom and aunts, mainly her aunts. They were Christian, but they were like
Catholic.
No. They were like hypocritical, like
judgmental.
You judgmental. You're gonna go to like that.
Okay.
And she's like, I don't like that. Was the motto.
I don't want to be like that.
She's like, I don't want to be that.
Yeah.
And that kept her away from God and church for most of her life.
Yeah. And then, so she's also from Mexico?
No, her family's from Guatemala.
Guatemala?
Yeah, she was born in Boston. We met in Chicago.
Boston and Guatemala. That seems difficult in my head.
We talked to my mother-in-law and we asked her, how in the world did you get to Boston?
How did you stay in Boston?
And yes, because when she came to LA from Guatemala.
Yeah,
it was more common, more
sense.
Latino community, immigrant community. So it was
Boston, man.
And then when she was there, this is the story that she tells us. I heard that there was work opportunities in Boston, so I just went.
Wow.
By herself. She had no
family
concept of how far it was from LA to the other side of the country.
She just switched coasts.
Yes, fully. And she was there for a couple of years, and then she moved to Chicago, where some of her relatives were already living in. So she moved closer to people's house.
So we'll touch on this a little bit. But Mexico, Guatemala.
Yeah.
Like, from a like outside perspective, people are like, oh, it's all Latino.
Yeah, it's very different.
It's very different, right? How would you? What are some of the differences you would describe between Mexico and Guatemala?
I hadn't thought about it like that. Nobody had asked me that specific question.
Really?
Yeah.
How long have you been married? Because no one's ever talked to you.
You're right. Yeah. I mean, so the culture is very different. The way that culture-wise, if I can differentiate. Just in general culture, you know how they say Mexican. I say they say. Partially true. Mexican men are very machista, like old school, more traditional. Like they get married, their wives are supposed to just cook. Blah, blah, blah.
Very conservative role.
Very. So that's very true. I mean, not all Mexico culture like that. That's very stereotypical. Yes. Well, Guatemala's even worse.
Really?
Yeah, like. Us Mexicans say that you guys are like even more so machista, and the men are it's so to give you some context. Jack's family come from all single mothers. So they get married, they just get divorced, and that's because the man just keep moving on. They're very mujeriegos, very
What?
mujeriegos. I don't know what the
That's a
term
good word. I
in
didn't learn
English. Mujeriegos is like they're very. There's a term in English. I'm blanking out on it. Very.
So why do they move on?
Anyways,
They're restless. They're just
no,
like
it's just
new girl, or
yeah.
oh,
It just yeah.
like
So
oh, interesting.
I'll just
So a lot
give
of
one
broken
example.
families,
It's
lack of male role
it's
models.
country of like broken families. Yeah,
Really
yeah,
interesting.
man. And I'm generalizing.
Yeah.
I know that there's
To all the
very,
Guatemalan listeners, we love Guatemala.
we do. I love Guatemala. My wife, my family's from there.
Yeah.
I've been there, so I know that I'm not.
No,
I'm
of
saying
course,
everybody.
but like that, yeah.
But
Because
just from the context of my family, of my wife's family,
right,
like she has uncles that have dozens of kids with multiple women.
yeah, patchwork family.
Yeah. So it's
a
like
very different understanding of
very
experience of family.
So she grew up with a very broken concept of what a healthy family is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I hear stories of other families, and it's just very, very, very similar.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Because I think the danger is people look at like, because like when you look at exponential Europe.
Yeah.
Europe is a big continent.
Yeah.
270 million
Yeah.
people, but then like very diverse, like very different.
Yes.
And then when you look at now, we're talking about Exponential Español.
Yeah.
It's the danger sometimes of thinking it.
It's the same. It's the same.
Whatever
language.
works in Mexico will work in Guatemala.
Not at all.
Well,
yeah.
different
That's
issues.
right. Yeah, that's right.
So your journey of church planting, you 2 years.
Yeah.
You planted.
So 2 years, got married, and then we started house church. My wife and I. That was like our first step for us together to get into a church planting. Yeah. Then planted another church after that, and then on the third church plant that we were getting into, that's when we intersected with Dave Ferguson and Exponential and this world of Exponential.
Was that the first interaction with multiplication as well, or was that always something that intuitively was there?
So for me, it was always there. Those were some of the frustrations that I had, like plans and desires for church to do how to do churches beyond just the typical, grow it, blah blah. And I just didn't have language to that. And Exponential gave me that language. The first time I came to an Exponential was 2009. And I was just blown away. It gave me language, vision to things that my heart had, my mind was dreaming up, but I didn't have any concepts. I hadn't had any models of this in the Spanish-speaking, community world that I was in. So it wasn't until I kind of started seeking this type of community resources in the broad culture in the U.S. That's when I kind of stumbled
found your tribe
into Exponential, found my tribe, and it's been like nonstop ever since. Yeah,
interesting. Since 2009.
Yeah,
it's been quite a journey.
Quite a journey. Yeah.
And now you lead the
Exponential Español.
Yeah. When did that start?
I soon my first time in Exponential. I'm like, this is what I've been looking for, and this is what a lot of Hispanic pastors don't know that they need, and we need this in Spanish, right? So that was just the burden that I felt stepping into Exponential Conference in 2009. It was this
we need to make this accessible
amazing experience for me, but at the same time this burden. I'm like, this is what we've needed, or something similar to this, right? So being in Chicago, connected with Dave, I ended up planting a church in the New Thing Network, which that's also led Dave Ferguson planted or started that around the same time Exponential was started. And I just continued to get connected in a tribe with church planters and multiplication. And at the same time, I started, asking Dave, hey, Dave, we need, I've noticed there's some Latino pastors that come to Exponential, what if we do a workshop that it's in Spanish, something that we can give them in their language? And he started saying yes. He started giving me opportunities to do Spanish workshops. We started growing the number of workshops that we've added after that. And then as Exponential started doing the regionals, we started doing some Spanish stuff there. And, fast forward to 10 years later, 2019, after, I guess, nagging at Dave, or like, hey, you guys need to do Exponential en Español. You guys need to do it in Español. And Dave's like, I guess after a while, he's like, no, why don't you do it? And that's been the heart of Exponential. How can, it's multiplying, right? It's not just reproducing this experience of the conferences and what they're doing and not just replicating that, but actually truly multiplying at its core,
right,
so that it can be done well in other expressions.
So when was the first Exponential
Español? So 2019, we did it was like a pilot, it was a test, see how it turned out. And it was just such a great response from Latino leaders.
Where, did you guys do it in Chicago?
We did it in LA. So that was, I was telling you earlier, this part wasn't recorded, but I was telling you my journey.
The best part of our conversation was before the recording.
That's right. We were in a sabbatical, my wife and I, transitioning from leading a local church to doing what we're essentially doing right now. So it was in that season of us, in that sabbatical, we were traveling in an RV for almost a year.
So good.
So at that time, we were kind of based out of like Southern California, and then we'll go to the places that we were going to go.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like home, but not really, because we were just nomads at the time.
Nomads, yeah.
But there was a local church that hosted us and believed in Exponential Español in us, that we needed that. And a church, Light in Life Christian Fellowship, Pastor Larry Walkemeyer was so supportive of this that he hosted the event.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So that was the first one.
How many people showed up to that?
Over 500.
Wow.
Like 540.
For a pilot?
For a pilot, yeah.
That's crazy.
And we had to, it got sold out about a month before, just because the space of the church, sanctuary had a 500 capacity. And we oversold it, and it was,
of course,
like typical Latinos, right? You just grab us.
We'll find it.
It says the capacity in a place for 100. We can fit 200.
Yeah.
No, but for, we wanted to be safe also. So it was great. But so after that, we were going to do it again, but pandemic hit. So then we just couldn't do anything. 21, 20, we started kind of revamping it again at the end of 2021. So 2 years of really nothing.
Yeah.
And it really stunned the momentum that we were created with the pilot. I mean, we were like at 540, and if we would have just continued, it would have picked up from there.
Yeah.
But sadly and unfortunately, the pandemic did kind of.
So you have to do a lot of kind of revamping that.
So 22 years later, we relaunched the conference, and it was like starting from scratch. Not even that 2019, that was a great, huge win, but that didn't help us kind of pick it up after pandemic.
Was that also because the churches through the pandemic were hit generally?
Yeah. So, but what I did during the pandemic time, 2020, early 2021, we started reimagining how to set up Exponential Español so it can be a truly Latino multiplication organization or ministry led by Latinos for Latinos. So what I started proposing to Dave was, what if Exponential launches Exponential Español as its own organization entity, not just part of a ministry.
Exponential Español was the first one that went kind of that moved out from their parents'
Exponential,
home.
Yeah.
Pretty much, and built their own house.
That's right.
Before Europe, even.
That's right. It was like maybe a little bit before Europe. Because it was the end of 2018, 19 that Europe launched.
Somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, we were just months ahead of what Europe. But when we started,
the name, right?
Yeah.
When I first heard it, I was like, "That's interesting." Why? I'm sure there was a whole process of how to call. Like there was lots of discussion.
There's a lot.
People felt very strongly about their recommendation.
Yeah.
But like, why did you land with that? Because why isn't it Exponential Latin America?
Yeah.
Or something like that?
We'll get there.
Yeah.
But our focus at that time was to serve the Hispanic church in the U.S.
Okay. So because that's the birthplace of it.
That's right. Yeah, it's been an organic growth, organic connections with the church in the U.S. Now, I don't know if you knew this, but if we were to count only the Hispanic, Spanish-speaking Latinos in the U.S. as a country, would be the second largest Latin country in the world.
That's crazy.
So it's huge. I mean, 65 million Hispanics in the U.S. That's the second largest Spanish-speaking country, if we were just to count the Latinos.
What's the largest?
Mexico.
How many?
125 million.
Okay.
Yeah, 125 million.
That's crazy.
And then it would be U.S. if you would if you just count the Latinos.
Yeah.
And then Colombia, and then you go from there.
Yeah.
So there's a huge need. And then my own personal journey.
Right.
There was nothing for church planting resources in Spanish here in the U.S. So that was just like the desire, the burden for the church here. So that's why we just kept it Exponential Español, because we're in the U.S., right? So that's how it's been the last.
So it still is because you've moved to Mexico City now.
Yes.
So this is your new ground.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just moved to Mexico City 3 months ago.
Okay.
3 months ago.
So you're taking Espanol to Latin America.
Latin America. Yeah.
Is that going to be a new Exponential?
That's a great question.
Oh.
I think.
Or will that just be? Will Espanol just kind of expand into becoming
correct? I right now
what I'm
the
world,
feeling.
Obe.
Yeah,
you want to do Europe as well?
Let's go.
Spain, and then from there just do the rest.
That's right. We'll conquer the world.
Romanian and Spanish.
That's right. It's there.
And then put Italy in there. And
Italy.
Obe's taking over the world.
Portugal, Brazil, of course. No, so like the vision right now is to expand Exponential Español to Latin America.
That's cool.
So we haven't done any official. We're in the early stages.
This is just between us. No one's going to listen to this private
of course.
conversation.
It's just between us. I know that God's been opening doors for us to do Latin America. And if I can share a little bit more of that burden that I felt early on, in the first few years of coming to Exponential, doing Espanol workshops and things like that in Exponential spaces, the burden grew to the church in Latin America. Mm. So that has been there. It's been my heart, over my shoulders not over my shoulders, on my shoulders, that burden for 10, 15 years.
What is that relationship between the church in Latin America and the Latino church
in the U.S.? It's unique. It's
because is there a connection? Is there some sort of sending either way, or is it disconnected because it's just birthed out of a very different situation?
Yeah, so I would say that these are great questions, by the way. I would say that for the most part, there has been a disconnect between the Latino church and the Hispanic church in the U.S. There is a lot of the immigrant first generation pastors that are starting churches in the U.S., Hispanic churches. They bring what they've known from the denomination, movement, whatever. Some do some were sent in a way. Like, my pastor knows that I'm here now, and he's giving me his blessings to start a church. It's not really spending, you know what I mean? He just has a permission to maybe use the name or something like that. But not really a connection.
There's no ongoing kind of a system that helps and coaches them in
that's
process,
right. Yeah. So then that has made the Hispanic church in the U.S. even more. I mean, we talked about loneliness in ministry for pastors, even more so, because
you can't connect to the local other English-speaking churches.
Yeah, they don't want. They just haven't been open to that.
It's a very different world too. Yeah,
and so then their narrative is like, oh yeah, we came from that church in Guatemala or in Mexico, in Colombia or whatever. But there's still no connection.
Yeah.
But here's the thing.
What about connection in between the Hispanic-speaking churches within, or is it?
It's up until the last few years, we're starting to see more of those new relational networks that are trying to do some of that. And don't get me wrong, denominationally speaking, there are some denominations that are doing a great job in connecting their pastors. So I don't want to say that it's all bad, but there is. I was just answering your question about the connection to Latin America. So denominationally, there's good efforts in connecting churches to one another within the denomination. And there's more efforts in the last maybe 5 years where denominations are being more intentional to support their pastors. And I'm talking the Hispanic context, right? Espanol context. To help them grow. Some are starting to use a multiplication, vision and language and things like that, but it's still very, very, very low. Here's the dynamics it boggles my mind. I've always said this, and a lot of Latino leaders would agree. The Latino church in the U.S., it's 20 to 30 years behind the predominant culture church in the U.S.
Oh, yeah.
You're right.
No surprise.
No surprise. But I think I know the reason why.
Why?
Because the Hispanic church, what I said, they come from Latin America and they kind of see the church they came from as their model.
Yeah.
So then their model to follow is not the U.S. church.
No.
Is the church in the city, town, village they come from.
Yeah.
So they from afar, they look at those churches in their home countries.
Yeah.
Right? And then that just builds a gap in between them.
Absolutely.
Right? But then the church in Latin America, guess who they're looking up to for models?
They're looking at the American church.
They're looking at the American church. So you have the Latino church in the U.S. looking at the Hispanic church in Latin America
that is looking
up to the U.S. American church.
And so you can tell the Hispanic church in the U.S. just look next door because
they can. So then if we analyze the church in Latin America in general, the gap between what we see in the U.S. or Western context is smaller than the Hispanic church. And
fascinating.
It's like, what? I mean, you have neighbors. You're using a church that you can learn from directly, and you're still not learning.
You want the indirect.
Yeah, it's.
Well, and part of it is because we're seeing that with generally cultures that go. So when migrants move out of a country into a foreign country, because there is a longing to retain their culture and not lose it, they become that much more conservative and traditional.
100%, yes.
While their own country that they've left moves on, but they don't move on because they're in this retaining thing.
And they're disconnected.
So, like, for example, in my neighborhood, lots of people from Morocco as well. And they always tell me, so when Moroccan women come into our neighborhood because they married someone there, they say, like, I have to live more conservatively here in Frankfurt, Germany, than I have in Morocco, because Morocco's moved on, but the Moroccans in Frankfurt have kind of, and you see that with all different cultures, right? There's a kind of like, let's not lose our culture. Let's not forget our roots. You know? Don't forget from where you're from.
That's right. Like, and I don't know if that's just a general immigrant mentality.
Right. And so there's a fear
anywhere
to change.
In the world. Yes.
There's a fear, and I wonder how that plays then into like multiplication, because you're changing the model.
Yeah.
But it feels like you're changing the culture. Right. And so it's like you're making us less Guatemalan or whatever.
That's right.
You're bringing this like other culture in, but ironically, the Guatemalans are doing it. They've moved on. They've already adapted it
to the new thing. Right.
Right.
And in the U.S., I've heard so many stories directly, leaders telling me these stories that they left their parents' church, that the parents are the pastors,
Yeah.
because they're not giving them permission to do the youth service in English. And none of the students speak Spanish.
Yeah.
And
This is another
because they
thing.
want to
Yeah.
preserve as much as possible
Right.
their roots, their culture,
Yeah.
and their language.
Right. Which is totally understandable.
100%, yes.
But by doing that, they're actually causing the opposite.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the things that we have to be reminded that as pastors and leaders, God's not calling us to preserve a language
Yeah.
or
Wow.
a ethnic culture.
Wow.
It's to preserve the gospel and to carry on to the next generation.
That's a lot coming from
Yeah.
someone with Mexican
Yeah.
heritage.
Yeah.
If
It's not easy.
If your relatives would hear this now,
I know.
it's like, well, it's almost as drastic as like Jesus saying, like, "Who's my mother? Who's my brother? Who's
That's
my
right.
sister?" It's like,
Yeah.
what a crazy statement in that culture.
Yeah.
In your hometown, it's like, here, this is my brother, this is my sister. There's a revolutionizing of the understanding of heritage too. Fascinating.
Yeah. So Exponential Español now, we are starting to dream and build some strategy to take Exponential Español to Latin America and essentially, shape it to how it's going to be contextually relevant. Because the church in Guatemala is very different than the church in Colombia, very different to the church in Argentina or Puerto Rico or Peru.
Chile, they're doing
Yeah.
the whole thing. Yeah.
But we're seeing how, ironically, the leaders in Latin America are more hungry and ready for what Exponential Español is doing right now. We just did our first regional conference in Puerto Rico, just almost 2 weeks ago. And man, just you can see it in their eyes and how they're receiving what the resources that Exponential we've been doing here in the U.S. for 5 years, and they're like devouring it and wanting us to give them more and to come back and do another something. And that's something that I have not seen in the Latino leaders in the U.S.
And is that tied to what we were talking about before?
Yes.
That kind of not wanting to change.
Yes, 100%. So they're ready for that, right? And they're gonna move on and get to it
because they don't have that fear within their own context.
That's right.
And here it's like,
there's a lot of factors for the Hispanic culture in general in the U.S., right? It's not just we're gonna do the next thing for the church. No, a lot of them are still working 2-3 jobs just to maintain their family and helping their family back in their home country. Yeah. So their focus, it's not
survival mode.
It's a lot of that. Yes, not everybody. I'm not generalizing.
Same in Europe, but it's
that.
Obviously the majority of Christians in Europe are not the Europeans, right? And so going forward, even with Exponential Europe, we have to start thinking about how do we involve the Chinese church?
Yeah.
How do we involve
the Latino church?
Or the Latino church, or the African churches. But their mindset is obviously different.
Yeah.
And then colonial history plays into it. And especially in Europe, it's like, how do we touch this without causing a
respectful kind of manner?
And like we invite them into the conversation, and it on both sides. So one of my very good friends, he's from Cameroon.
Okay.
And he says we have to be really, really careful that even coming from Africa, he has to tell his African brothers and sisters, don't come with a reconquering mindset, spiritualized reconquering mindset. It's like, oh, you came to us, we're coming to you. Yeah. You might call it mission, but you have to be careful that we preserve the gospel and not preserve kind of the history there.
That's right.
And let the gospel redeem some of that story. Yeah. But I think moving forward, we have to realize with some of these, I think we have a lot to learn from Exponential Español with the struggles you've seen there, because that's going to be the same for the Chinese church and for the Eritrean church. It's like there's a fear and as you try to retain that culture and that cultural heritage, what does multiplication mean within the context that is in your own country? Mm-hmm. When, like you said, your kids don't identify fully as Chinese anymore, but then they don't feel really at home as a only German speaking church. And there's this weird second, third generation question.
Yeah.
There's on a lot of ethnic churches. That's the big question. And so when you multiply there, do they, is the daughter church a Chinese speaking church? Or is it a German, what? And then if it's not a Chinese speaking church, how do we retain influence? Right. Especially with cultures where, where you came out of us. We have to send, how do we? So a lot of these questions, I think, will be faced. We'll face in Europe as well.
So I in Spain. I was in Spain 2 years ago for a Exponential Europe regional in Madrid. Or in Spain it was Toledo actually, and just most of the people in the regional were Spanish leaders, pastors. There was a few Latino pastors there, from Mexico, from Colombia, Central America. So I met someone from Central America as well. But in conversations with the Spanish pastors, and they told me this stat. I can't remember the exact one, but what they're saying is that the 80% of people church members
Latinos.
Are Latinos. I'm like, what?
Same in Portugal.
Yeah.
So Portugal, 80% Brazilian.
So what frustrates the Spanish pastors that have 80-90% of their church members Latinos is this. And I don't know how they communicated or how they share, but at least he shared with me. They're coming here with a conquered mindset in a way.
It's the same thing again. Yeah.
And we want to give them permission to lead,
and they don't realize it.
And they don't realize.
They don't realize
that's where
it's so deep. It's so deep. They don't realize it.
So it's so fresh in the because there's a wave of Latinos moving to Europe.
Oh, a lot, yeah.
And specifically in Spain over the last maybe 5 years or so.
Portugal is crazy.
Yeah,
the amounts of Brazilians is insane. Yeah.
So what they're experiencing there, that's what the church here is, and that's how it's been. They come with that same mindset. We're like, we have to submit. We can't, do what we want because we're not. We can't. We're not supposed to.
Yeah.
The whites are superior, and that's just not
right.
That's not God's heart.
No,
and that's not God's kingdom.
Not. Yeah,
and that's not what we want. But it's so deep in our DNA that it's so frustrating to to do that.
We could do a whole podcast series on that, man.
Yes,
that's so fascinating. So coming back to Exponential Europe being quote unquote only 6 years old.
Yeah.
The finding its identity in the exponential family, if you will, and realizing what are some of the things from the U.S. story and the principles, well, maybe less the principles, but maybe the practice that we can translate over into European context and what isn't, and what do we need to diversify within the European context. That's been a lot of the, I think, Exponential Europe story.
Yeah.
As you've shaped Exponential Español within U.S., where have you seen differences between that works in the U.S. in the English-speaking churches? We got to do it differently in the Hispanic-speaking churches,
in the U.S.
Yeah. Have you seen sort of Exponential needing to take a little bit of a different shape?
Yeah.
And can you point to some of those things?
I think the openness to change in general. So I'll start there. I know that doesn't answer the question specifically, but that's been one of the biggest challenges. With everything that we've already said, Latinos, immigrants within the church context, there's a deep fear of change for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So adapting to something new, multiplication is the new, reproducing is the new. So that's biblical. That's the foundation of the church.
The OG.
It's
the OG idea.
It's the original. Yes, that's a foundation of what God called the church to do, to reproduce and multiply. Right.
And I point people to Genesis 1, verse 11.
Yes.
And it's like he created the trees to hold within them the seed. And I'm like, see. In the very fabric of creation. And then I read the other day, Christopher Walken, he talks about, the Great Commission and the telling Adam and Eve to multiply, and telling the disciples to go and make disciples. He's like, Adam and Eve were made in the image, and we're asked to continue what God has started, which is to continue making images. The disciples were made disciples and were asked to continue
to reproduce that.
To continue the story, because they were made disciples to continue making disciples, right? Which is the new creation, which now doesn't take a biological multiplication route, but now takes the spiritual multiplication route, which is a beautiful kind of way to paint that. But so it's not a new idea.
It's not a new idea.
But we've lost it somewhere on the way.
We have. So that fear of changing what they know from the home countries they come from, it just keeps them limited. Some grow, some will eventually get there. So Latinos in general, even just culture in general, are late adopters to new trends. Whether that's Christian ideas, Christian thoughts, Christian practices, or pop culture stuff, or just in general. Being in Mexico, I can see that even more. So I'm like, oh, I see that. It's that trend that wasn't happening in the U.S. is just getting here. Not they just getting here, but the people are just grasping and living that out. So that's also true for the church context, right? Kind of what I was saying a little bit on how there's like a 20, 30-year gap between the Hispanic church and the American church. So that fear of change has been the most challenging for us, because while we're not introducing nothing new, we're just kind of bringing that back to our top of the list and say like, hey, we got to do this again as a church and reproduce and multiply.
What have you seen work best there?
Yeah.
What has been like?
So what we've seen, those that are more open to listening, to us about, hey, here's some practices you should multiply, reproduce, are, it's actually very true to how the Exponential US has learned this. The 5 levels, right? In subtraction, plateaued, growing, reproducing, multiplying. The churches that leaders that we've seen kind of receive the challenge of like become a multiplier are the ones that are in level 3.
Interesting.
So level 3 leaders that already are experiencing some growth and they're looking for what's next. They've gotten the church to that growth because they've always been looking for what's next. And they've learned to create systems and things like that. But because there's a little part of them always looking for what's next, it makes them more open to the idea of reproducing, multiplying. It's not new, but again. So then those that have kind of walked away from a training, learning community, an event or whatever, with a desire and a commitment to multiply, are those that are already in level 3. That mindset, it's a addition mindset. We're challenging them to go beyond that one. And we see the results there. Not many, but we see more so than those that are level 1 or level 2. They're in survival mode. The thought of like, wait, I don't know if I'm
already losing. Why would I send more people away?
That's right. I don't know if I'm gonna have a church service next Sunday, and you're talking about multiplying the 5 people that I have or whatever.
There's been unique experiences for me in Germany with churches that have been brought to their knees of like, we might die. That opens the conversation on, okay, so you're trying to save something here. What are you trying to save?
That's right.
And I'm like, at the end of the day, what do you want this to be? And actually being kind of like the stories that we hear from the church in China when they had to let go of things just politically and legally. It almost opened them up then to be like, oh, if we don't have enough people to keep a worship service going, maybe it isn't about the worship service. Not that worship services are bad, but like what at the core of it, what is it we're trying to like? So there has been unique moments where a mature leader in a dying church is able to open up the conversation. But that's very rare because they're in survival mode. They're just clinging to whatever to keep going.
We've been focused on identifying those level 3 leaders that are ready for level 4, level 5. That's kind of like the low-hanging fruit for us. But at the same time, because of the lack of resources that are out there in Spanish, there's more and more, but they're still very limited. what do we do about those leaders level 1, level 2? So one of the things that Exponential Español is considering is like, okay, our goal is multiplication, right? And we know that if we focus on this level, these groups, these pastors in level 3, we'll get them to move into level 4, level 5 mentality, all that. But we don't want to just ignore the challenges of level 1, level 2 leaders. So we've actually considered, what can we do to help them get out of that danger zone, or get out of that mindset of like, I'm in survival mode.
Scarcity thinking.
Can we help them move out of that that zone?
Yeah.
And then they feel more comfortable. Okay, I'm not gonna die as a church or as a church leader or whatever.
Yeah.
Then get them to the next level. So my challenge is like, that's a lot of like effort and time and to help them. And obviously, Exponential, we're not here to, help churches not die. We just want to help the churches that want to multiply, right? Yeah. So I just, we have to be careful that if we provide some resources for them, for us not to lose
the sight of what
we're actually wanting to help everyone in the church body.
But I think that's a general challenge with discipleship multiplication, leadership multiplication, church multiplication. So there's a book I remember. I'm not sure this is how they use the story, but I use it like that now. In Abraham in his tent.
Yeah.
And the idea that he's thinking about who's going to be my heir.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, maybe it'll be my servant and something like that. And then God being like, hey, come out of the tent. Look at the stars. Like, I'm doing a much bigger story. You think just about the next one.
Yeah.
I'm painting you a picture of like the whole story.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to see a lot of it. So like, I tell leaders like, hey, you have to have regular time where you come out of your tent.
Yeah.
You're just thinking about who's going to be the next leader.
So good.
How am I going to do the next service?
Yeah.
You just think about the next one, and then like figuring that out. God's painting a much bigger picture, right?
That's
I think for people, even in their own personal discipleship, to remember that.
100%. Yeah.
Hey, Obi, thanks so much. We've got a lot to learn from you guys, and how exciting! I'm so excited to see what happens in Mexico City and the Latin America in the future. So I'll be closely watching that, and
appreciate that.
Good meeting you, man.
Thank you for inviting me to this conversation. And I'm talking to my wife about going to Exponential Europe conference in Berlin.
Let's go
in October. So
let's hang out.
I hope I can make it so we can hang out.
Yeah, I'm gonna pray for your wife. Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Okay.
It's not that she wants to. We just have to find the way and the funds to make it to get there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. See you in Berlin then.
Yeah.